What drives a man to destroy what others hold sacred? And what happens when the echoes of that destruction awaken a force he cannot see, cannot control, and can no longer ignore? A sacred chapel reduced to rubble. A soldier driven by rage, standing at the edge of his own reckoning. What he does next will change not just a building, but his soul. This tale is one of fire and faith, of unstoppable hate and a hope too bright to fade. Step into a story that dares you to believe in the impossible. Watch and let the truth unfold. Flames were swallowing California as wildfires tore through the landscape. Smoke smothered the air. Families grabbed what they could and ran. Cars clogged the roads. Trees cracked and fell. Homes crumbled. Chaos ruled. At the center of it all was St. Mary's Chapel. The wildfire devoured it without mercy. Jonah McBride wasn't there. He was miles away, waiting for orders, growing angrier by the second. Why are we wasting time here? This place was a disaster waiting to happen. His squad, Sergeant Reed, Private Cole, and Specialist Barnes, shifted uneasily. They had grown used to Jonah's foul mood, though no one dared to challenge him directly. "We'll move when we're told," Sergeant Reed said quietly, folding a map, "so stay sharp." Jonah snorted, crossing his arms. Silence fed his bitterness. This place wasn't worth it, he thought. Just another dead town full of dead weight. When the call finally came, Jonah climbed into the truck with his squad. The convoy rolled toward the flames. Jonah lit a cigarette, stared at the glowing horizon, and spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "Bet half these people don't even speak English. We'll show up and they'll just stare at us. If you like this kind of action, make sure to subscribe for more. We'll keep pushing forward no matter what." Private Cole glanced at Jonah from the passenger seat. "You know, some folks just lost everything," Cole said. "They might need help more than judgment." Jonah blew a stream of smoke towards Cole. "If they did things right, they wouldn't be in this mess," Jonah shot back. No one answered. They never did. By the time they arrived, it was too late. Streets were unrecognizable, buried in ash. Cars stood as skeletons, twisted and melted. Jonah's stomach churned. Not with sympathy, but with frustration. A young mother held her screaming baby. Medics ran to help, calling for blankets and water. Jonah shook his head. "Should have done a better job looking after her kid," he muttered. Specialist Barnes heard him and frowned. "That's cold, Jonah," Barnes said, looking away. "She's hurting." Jonah turned away, ignoring the comment. His jaw was set, his eyes distant. Weeks passed. Cleanup began. Volunteers handed out water. Crews sifted through rubble. People prayed near the ruins of St. Mary's Chapel. Jonah spotted them on patrol, and the sight grated on him. Rebuild the church? He scoffed to Sergeant Reed. "Waste of resources, if you ask me." Reed sighed but said nothing. Faith irritated Jonah. Hope irritated him. He watched a small group kneel in prayer, their voices soft but steady. He knew they were praying in Spanish, though he didn't catch a single word. Maybe if they worked harder instead of praying, they wouldn't be here, Jonah said, loud enough for Reed and Barnes to hear. Barnes exchanged a glance with Reed. Neither responded. "You always got something better to say," Private Cole muttered under his breath, but Jonah pretended not to hear. The man rebuilding St. Mary's was Reverend Torres, Latino, mid-50s, kind to a fault. Jonah hated him. Torres was always smiling, always helping, always there. Jonah watched him hand out water to a line of survivors one day and shook his head. "Probably here illegally," Jonah said under his breath, just loud enough for Cole to pick up. Cole ignored him, but Sergeant Reed finally spoke up. "You've no idea who he is or where he comes from, Jonah. You only know his kindness." Jonah bristled at Reed's quiet reprimand. "Kindness?" Jonah repeated with scorn. "That's not going to save anyone." Reed's lips tightened, but he turned away. He had no energy for a fight. At night, Jonah stood on a ridge. Below, lights flickered around the chapel ruins. Volunteers hammered, raising new beams. Some sang hymns, though Jonah couldn't understand the words. He lit a cigarette and exhaled, glaring at the glow. "They're rebuilding for people who don't even belong here," he said to no one in particular. Private Cole had followed him up the ridge. "I think they're just trying to put their lives back together," Cole said gently. "You can't blame them for that." Jonah spat on the ground, flicked his cigarette away, and walked back to his trailer. Cole watched him go, concern etched on his face. Inside the trailer, the air was stale. A radio somewhere in the hall played soft worship music. Jonah slammed his fist against the nearest wall. "Sing it in English," he growled, though no one could hear him. He lay down, staring at the ceiling. Sleep didn't come easy. His dreams were all fire and smoke. Shadows screamed in languages he didn't understand. Somewhere in the chaos, his father's face appeared. Twisted, silent, gone. The next day, Jonah walked past the chapel. The cross was finished now, towering over the ruins. Volunteers clapped and cheered. A small crowd prayed, their voices soft and steady. Jonah stopped and stared, his stomach twisted in knots. "They don't deserve this," he muttered, fists clenching. Sergeant Reed, returning from a supply run, stepped up beside Jonah. "Who doesn't deserve what?" Reed asked, studying Jonah's face. Jonah didn't look at him. "Any of it. Hope, salvation, second chances," Jonah said, practically spitting the words out. "They build that cross like it's gonna save them from the next wildfire." Reed's gaze hardened. "You know, Jonah," Reed said carefully, "the fire's not the only thing doing damage around here. Sometimes people's hearts burn hotter than any wildfire." Jonah said nothing. He turned and walked away, ignoring Reed's words. Hatred still roiled in him. Hatred for the chapel, for the people building it, for everything they represented. In his mind, they didn't deserve redemption, and he was about to make sure they never got it. His hatred bubbled over, not just for the chapel or the people building it, but for everything they represented. In his mind, they didn't deserve redemption, and he was about to make sure they didn't get it. The anger escalated every time Jonah saw new progress on the chapel. He spotted fresh wooden beams rising from the rubble. He overheard people praising God for second chances and guiding their hands in rebuilding. In one instance, he crossed a street to avoid a small prayer circle that had formed under a scotched oak tree. Their soft voices, filled with gratitude, felt like knives stabbing at his heart. Later that day, while collecting supplies for the guard, he noticed Reverend Torres assisting with distributions. "How are you holding up?" the pastor asked, tone sincere. "I heard you lost someone before coming here." Jonah's jaw tightened. "I'm fine, don't worry about me." Torres offered him a cup of coffee. Jonah refused to meet his gaze. The pastor spoke quietly of hope, of new beginnings. Jonah felt his old bitterness surge. His father was gone. A new beginning couldn't change that. "Listen," he muttered, "I don't need a sermon." Torres set a hand on Jonah's shoulder. "If you ever want to talk." Jonah jerked away. "I'm not your son," he hissed. "Leave me alone." Sleep didn't come. Jonah stared at the ceiling, fists clenched, the image of the chapel's new cross burning in his mind. It wasn't hope to him, it was a taunt. He threw on his boots and stepped into the cold night. The streets were silent, littered with ash and shadows. His feet carried him to St. Mary's. The fence was unlocked. He pushed through without hesitation. The site was quiet. Stacks of wood, tubs of nails, and bright panes of stained glass lay ready for another day's work. A simple wooden altar stood in the center, waiting to take its place. Jonah's chest tightened. His grief and anger merged into a single driving force. He grabbed a crowbar. The first swing shattered a pane of stained glass, the crash echoing in the stillness. The next sent shards flying like jagged confetti. His strikes grew wilder, fueled by fury he couldn't contain. He smashed lights, tore down beams, and reduced the altar into splinters. Finally, he snapped the cross in half, throwing the pieces to the ground. Panting, he stood amidst the wreckage. For a fleeting moment, there was a grim satisfaction. Then voices sounded in the distance. Jonah froze, fear overtaking his anger. Dropping the crowbar, he slipped into the shadows and disappeared into the night. Dawn revealed the wreckage. Volunteers arrived early to find the chapel destroyed, beams shattered, glass crushed into dust, the cross ripped apart. Those who had seen it standing the day before froze in disbelief. Tears fell, some knelt, sifting through the ruins, holding broken shards like they could somehow put them back together. Reverend Torres came soon after. His face was pale, but his voice was calm. He didn't yell, he didn't curse. Instead, he gathered the volunteers in a prayer circle. "This is just wood and glass," he said softly. "What matters is us, our spirit." His words steadied some, but not all. The news spread fast. People came from all over paradise, drawn to the ruins. Many had lost everything in the fire. Now they had lost this too. They asked the same question over and over. Why? No one had an answer. Jonah stayed away. He locked himself in his trailer, curtains drawn tight. The guardsmen were whispering. Someone had destroyed the chapel. They didn't say his name, but Jonah felt their stares. He felt their silence. He told himself it didn't matter. It was just a building, but the guilt sank deep. He He couldn't stop seeing it, the crowbar in his hands, the wood splintering, the cross crashing down. Every time he closed his eyes, it was there. When he slept, the dreams came. Fire, broken pews, his father's hospital bed. They blurred together, feeding the shame he couldn't shake. He tried to tell himself it wasn't his fault, but deep down, he knew the truth. Captain Mark Reynolds wasted no time the next morning. He stormed into Jonah's trailer with 2 guardsmen at his back. Jonah, halfway into his uniform, froze at the captain's livid expression. Without a word, Reynolds pointed outside. Jonah followed, boots clumsily laced. Inside a small command tent, the captain confronted him. "Did you vandalize St. Mary's last night?" His voice shook with anger. The 2 guardsmen looked on, their eyes flickering with horror and disappointment. Jonah's pulse thundered in his ears. He swallowed hard. There was no point denying it. "Yes, sir," he rasped. One of the guardsmen took a step back, as if Jonah had struck him. Captain Reynolds' face turned red, then somehow more pained than furious. "You've disgraced this uniform," he growled. "You've attacked the one place these people see as hope." Jonah braced for a torrent of accusations, but Reynolds closed his eyes, breathing hard. "Local authorities agreed to let the National Guard handle this internally. You're not court-martialed yet, but there will be consequences. You will help rebuild that chapel every day from sunup to sundown. This isn't optional. Do you understand?" Jonah stiffened, dread twisting his gut. "Yes, sir," he muttered. Reynolds leaned in, eyes locked on Jonah's. "You're on the thinnest ice possible. Step out of line again and you're finished here." When Jonah exited the tent, he felt the weight of fellow guardmen's gazes. Some turned away in disgust. Others just stared, disappointment etched on their faces. Jonah's hands trembled. He hadn't expected to feel such a sharp pang of regret, but there it was, clawing at his chest. That very afternoon, Jonah reported to the chapel site. He found the damage far worse in daylight. Broken beams jutted at awkward angles, and jagged fragments of stained glass littered the concrete. The makeshift altar, recently destroyed, lay in ruined chunks. A group of volunteers struggled to clear the chaos, their voices subdued. As soon as Jonah appeared, conversation died. Reverend Torres noticed him and approached. Sadness and concern mingled in the pastor's eyes. Jonah expected rage, but the man simply said, "We need to move these boards out of harm's way." His tone remained steady, but Jonah felt an undercurrent of sorrow. Nodding, Jonah slid on a pair of gloves. He could sense glares from the volunteers as he worked. Then an older woman in a faded scarf offered Jonah a bottle of water. She said nothing, just handed it to him before resuming her work. By afternoon, Jonah's arms ached from lifting debris. His gloves didn't stop splinters from stabbing his fingers. A shard of glass cut his leg when he wasn't paying attention. Each sting reminded him of the crowbar in his hand last night. One guardsman came to help. One gave him a short nod but said nothing. Another stayed far away, working on the other side of the site. Their silence hit harder than any words. By sundown, Jonah had swept broken glass into bins, carried shattered beams, and cleared metal scraps. The volunteers packed up their tools and left quickly. Reverend Torres stayed behind, walking through the ruins, looking for anything worth saving. "Tomorrow," Torres said. His voice was steady. 7 a.m. if you're ready. There's still work to do." Jonah swallowed hard. "I'll be there." Torres didn't smile. He just nodded, his tired eyes full of something Jonah didn't understand. The next morning, Jonah went back to the chapel. The volunteers were already working. Miriam, an older woman with a scarf tied around her hair, handed him gloves without a word. Jonah took them and got to work. He focused on the job, lifting beams, sweeping glass, tossing junk into the dumpster. He kept his head down, ignoring the quiet whispers and side glances. One afternoon, as the others left, Jonah stayed behind to finish stacking wood. A little girl wandered in. She wore old overalls and hugged a worn teddy bear. She stopped a few feet away. "Are you the soldier who broke the church?" she asked. Her voice was soft, curious, not angry. Jonah froze. His throat felt tight. "Yes," he said. The girl looked at the broken walls, then at him. "You're fixing it now?" Jonah nodded. "I'm trying." She smiled, just a little. "Mom says people can change." She held out a crumpled piece of paper with a drawing on it, a bright yellow cross under a sun. "Can you give this to the pastor? It's for the new church." Jonah took it carefully. I will. The girl hugged her teddy and left. Jonah stared at the drawing for a long time. Something shifted inside him. He didn't know what, but it was there. Day by day, Jonah worked with the volunteers. Slowly he began to talk to them. He learned their stories. Miriam told him about her husband. He died in the fire trying to save a neighbor's dog, she said. He didn't go to church, but when the fire came, he prayed. Fear makes you do things like that. Jonah nodded, unsure what to say. He thought of his father's last prayers. They had made him angry, but now he saw something else. These people weren't weak. They weren't clinging to false hope. They were holding on to something real, something that kept them going. For the first time, Jonah wondered if maybe that mattered more than he thought. A turning point came late one evening when Reverend Torres approached Jonah, holding the child's crayon drawing. The pastor's eyes brimmed with quiet warmth. "Thank you for bringing this to me," he said, smoothing the paper's creases. "It's these small gestures that remind us why we rebuild." Jonah shifted, uneasy. "I didn't do much, just passed it on." Torres offered a soft smile. "Still, you helped keep the child's hope alive." He paused, scanning Jonah's face. "I learned you lost your father not too long ago." The mention of his father made Jonah's stomach churn. "Yeah, cancer," he said, voice clipped. Torres nodded, compassion evident. He visited Paradise a few times for business. He donated some tools to help us fix damaged homes, helped build a small playground near the chapel. Told me he wished you could see how faith could be lived in action. Jonah's breath caught. His father had never told him any of this. Why? Had Jonah's scorn toward religion kept him away from sharing these experiences? Torres continued gently. He believed faith was about love, not control. About shining light in dark places. When he spoke of you, he was proud, even if you didn't agree with him on everything. Jonah closed his eyes, fighting an unexpected surge of tears. He pictured his father's worn face, the final whisper of, "God has a plan," which Jonah had dismissed. Maybe his dad had found peace in helping others. Maybe it wasn't about blind devotion. Torres laid a hand on Jonah's shoulder. "We all struggle. But please know, you have a place here if you want." With that, the pastor left, leaving Jonah to wrestle with conflicting emotions. He felt a crack in his rigid walls of anger. Maybe faith wasn't a weapon after all. Maybe it was the gentle hand that had tried to guide him. Jonah's approach to rebuilding changed after that conversation. He stopped hunching defensively and began actually talking to people. He hammered floorboards and installed new beams, asking for tips from more experienced carpenters. When someone offered him water, he said, "Thank you," rather than ignoring them. He learned about the chapel's original stained glass. Each panel depicted a scene from local life: a teacher reading to children, a firefighter battling flames, a nurse aiding a patient. Jonah wondered if his father's quiet kindness had been reflected in such images. The thought humbled him. One afternoon, he carefully fitted a pane of glass into its frame, sealing it with lead. A teenage boy hurried over, offering to help steady the ladder. Jonah recognized him as a kid who had nearly dropped a heavy beam weeks ago. Together, they adjusted the glass until it slid into place, the sun casting a kaleidoscope of color onto the dusty floor. "Looks good," the boy said, stepping back, pride in his eyes. "Thank you." Jonah nodded, a hint of a smile tugging at his lips. "No problem." That evening, Jonah sought out Reverend Torres in a small trailer, serving as the chapel's office. Stepping inside, he found the pastor seated at a fold-out desk covered in notes. Torres gestured for Jonah to take the spare chair. For a moment, Jonah wrestled with what to say. At last, he murmured, "I hated this place. I hated God. Maybe I still do, a little. My dad died and he trailed off, throat tightening." Torres nodded, allowing silence to fill the space. Rain pattered on the trailer's roof. Losing someone is always painful. Holding on to anger can feel easier than facing the pain head-on. Jonah inhaled shakily. "He told me God had a plan. I never believed it. I couldn't see anything but suffering." Torres leaned forward. "Faith doesn't remove pain, Jonah. It helps us carry it. It opens us to the idea that goodness can shine even in the darkest places." Jonah felt tears burning behind his eyes. He cleared his throat. "I think I see that now, through these people. They lost so much, but they keep going." The pastor reached across the desk and briefly squeezed Jonah's hand. "Your father loved you deeply. I imagine he wanted you to discover the kind of hope he found in your own time." Jonah nodded, too overwhelmed to speak further. but as he left, he felt lighter, as though he'd set down a burden he'd carried far too long. Jonah's renewed vigor spread into each day's labor. He arrived early, often before the other volunteers, and stayed late. Together, they framed new walls, replaced broken beams, and carefully installed each new piece of stained glass. Every hammer strike felt like a heartbeat of possibility. Every pane of glass reminded Jonah that something broken could become beautiful again. Captain Reynolds checked on him periodically, arms crossed, expression stern. But underneath, Jonah sensed the captain's relief. Jonah's fellow guardsman slowly softened too. He still carried grief for his father, but it no longer consumed him. The morning was bright, warm, clear. Paradise still carried its scars, yet something about this day felt different. God's mercy seemed to hover over the town, bathing it in fresh hope. People gathered outside St. Mary's Chapel. They wore clean clothes, mostly donated by local churches. Folding chairs filled the courtyard. Pots of flowers sat by the steps, little bursts of color symbolizing new life. Reverend Horace stood at the front, a well-worn Bible in his hands. The room fell silent as he raised his eyes. "Today," he said, "we celebrate more than a building. We celebrate the grace of our Lord. We've lost much in these fires, but through it all, God has been with us, and we've found each other." Polite applause rose from the congregation. Jonah looked down at his hands. He felt Torres's eyes on him, but he didn't lift his head. "We honor everyone who helped rebuild this chapel," Torres continued, voice steady. "That includes those who've stumbled but chose to stand again by the power of Christ's forgiveness." Jonah's face burned. He kept staring at his hands. The applause was soft but kind. No judgment, just Christian acceptance, a mercy that stung in a way he had never expected. A hymn followed, its lyrics praising Jesus' sacrifice and love. Then Torres invited everyone to light candles, some for lost loved ones, others as symbols of prayer and hope. One by one, people stepped forward. They lit candles. Some wept softly, others smiled through tears. The flames grew, soft and steady, illuminating the chapel like a tapestry of faith. Jonah hesitated. His chest felt tight, but something pulled him forward. He rose from his seat, candle trembling in his hand as he approached the altar. Memories washed over him. His father in the hospital, the silent prayers Jonah had refused to hear, the anger and bitterness he had clung to for years. He lit the candle. The small flame flickered, dancing before his eyes. "For you, Dad," he whispered, voice cracking, "and for Jesus, who never left us." He set the candle among the others, watching its light join the collective glow. It didn't fix everything, but it was a start, a step toward redemption. Back in his seat, Jonah listened to the final hymn. The words spoke of God's unfailing love, and the melody swelled, rising toward the ceiling. Jonah blinked away tears. A small, almost timid smile broke through. When the service ended, the congregation flowed outside. Children played tag near the steps. Families lunched together, sharing the warmth of fellowship. Jonah hung back, letting the sunlight spill over him like a promise of new beginnings. Reverend Torres approached. "How do you feel?" he asked, gently closing his Bible. Jonah looked toward the chapel, the rebuilt steeple, the shining cross. "Not as angry," he said softly. "Still hurts, but it's lighter now." Torres nodded. "That's how it starts," he said, placing a comforting hand on Jonah's shoulder. "God meets us in our brokenness and walks with us toward healing." Jonah glanced around, noticing how neighbors helping neighbors. Miriam smiled at him across the courtyard. A teenage boy who had once needed food donations gave Jonah a respectful nod. Captain Reynolds, who oversaw the relief efforts, offered him a small salute. For the first time, Jonah felt the heavy bitterness begin to dissolve. Something new stirred in his heart, something that felt a lot like grace. Stepping onto the road, Jonah looked back at the chapel, rebuilt, strong, a beacon of Christ's love in a land scorched by fire. And at that moment, Jonah felt a spark in his chest he hadn't felt in years. It was hope. And as he walked away, he realized it was more than that. It was the start of faith. The story doesn't end here. From the ashes of destruction to the light of redemption, this journey shows that faith and hope can withstand anything. If you're ready for more stories that challenge the unknown and ignite curiosity, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon. See you in the next one.